Hello, Heidi Oropesa with Florida You Judge, and thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to have a pretty interesting conversation about the renaming of the Pinellas Courthouse after the late Bernie McCabe, who led the office for, I believe, around 30 years or over 30 years. He was the elected state attorney and someone who worked for him, who's currently the House Speaker for in the legislature, our legislature, Florida legislature, Chris Sprowls. He has asked, Chris Sprowls has asked the Pinellas Commission to rename the Pinellas County Courthouse, which is currently named Pinellas County Justice Center, after a late prosecutor who served the community for over 30 years. And joining me in this discussion is attorney Vasigh. He's very involved in politics locally. He is a commentator on his social media. We have Dan Parri. He's also an attorney. He is very also involved and recently was covered last year before the November 3rd election. What was it? The Washington Post, the New York Times? Which Parri article did you come out? Publication?
New York Times.
Okay, and because he was very involved, he used to be a Republican, and then after our former president's first term, he decided he was going to switch parties, so he's a very dedicated Democrat. And I believe because of his effort and activism and energy and passion, and woof, you are all those things, Dan, for real. I'm very proud of you, respect you highly, admire you much. I believe, based on your efforts, you had some part in flipping Pinellas blue. I think by 5,000 registered voters now, there's more Democratic registered voters here in Pinellas. Am I correct on that?
Sounds good. I'll take credit for at least 2 votes. 2 votes I'll take credit for. That's about it. One was mine. I didn't vote twice, though, but you know.
Okay, and we also have someone that I was able to make the acquaintance of not too long ago, Getulio Gonzalez-Mulattieri. Hi, and thank you also for joining us. He is a young man that's up and coming as a community activist. I see him doing a lot of good things in the community here in the Tampa Bay area. So welcome, and thank you also for joining me. We want this panel, we want the public to call in. The call-in number is 813-221-9700. The bulk of the time that we're going to dedicate tonight to this topic, I want, of course, Vasigh, Dan Parri, and Getulio to comment, weigh in. But we would like, as a group, for the public to call in 813-221-9700, particularly if you live in Pinellas County. What do you say about the current House Speaker of the Florida legislature, Chris Sprowls, who's a Republican? He used to be a prosecutor in Pinellas County. I believe he says that Bernie McCabe, the late Bernie McCabe, was a mentor to him. So sadly, Bernie McCabe, at the beginning of the year, he passed away. I'm going to, at this time, express condolences to his family. That was sad. And I also want to, in the event that anyone has a question about my motivation for being very vocal about the renaming, I want the public to know that I had an opportunity in 2017 to have a very positive interaction with Mr. McCabe. And I had proposed legislation because a Tampa Bay criminal defense attorney had contacted me about a client that he defended, that the victim appeared to have attempted an extortion, who was asking for money in exchange for him recanting what he had told the state attorney's office, law enforcement, as to an alleged crime. This criminal defense attorney wanted his investigator to they couldn't record this individual without his permission, because we are a 2-party state. and it would violate the wiretap statute. So I asked in 2017 and made Mr. McCabe aware of this, that there should be an exception in the wiretap statute that would allow a citizen who is being extorted by someone, for that person to be able to record that extortion without falling being in violation of the wiretap. So that was a very positive encounter. I would urge Chris Sprowls now during this legislative session to perhaps consider honoring Bernie in a legislative proposal that he agreed with. I have the actual email if Senator or House Rep Sprowls wishes for me to forward that to him. I want to also point out that I did reach out to House Rep Chris Sprowls, and I asked him if he wanted to join us. I'd like Florida U Judge to be fair. I don't care about opposing views or views that would be opposed to myself or any guests that I have on, but I want it to be a fair conversation. And so he has not responded. He's asked the commission. They're in the process of considering renaming the Pinellas County Courthouse after Bernie McCabe, a longtime prosecutor. Maj, and I'm going to start with you. What are your thoughts as to that?
This is absurd. It's fully. This is the absurd analogy that you would look at if you wanted to come up with the worst possible person to name a not only a courthouse after, but the Justice Center after, to name it after one of the parties. There is, maybe someone can correct me, maybe Mr. Sprowls can come on and correct me one day, but I don't think there's any other courthouses named for one of the parties that has filed a zillion lawsuits in that county. This would be like, would anyone think they were getting a fair trial in the civil world if the courthouse was named the John Morgan Courthouse? No, it's absurd. No one would ever think that they were getting a fair trial in a civil courtroom where people's money matters. So yeah, that's my opinion on it.
Maj, here's a follow-up, because I was astounded. I worked for about 5 to 6 years for the recently retired Sixth Circuit public defender, Bob Dillinger. Okay. Bob Dillinger is touted in the community as a huge supporter of persons with mental illnesses, is an opponent of the death penalty, which Bernie was much a supporter and sought death sentences against some of his clients. So I was astounded that Bob Dillinger is on board with this. And I did reach out to Mr. Dillinger via his cell phone, and he has responded because I had a question for him. I asked him, are you on board with, seeing as he led that office for over 20 years, advocating on behalf of mentally ill persons, which the state seeks the death sentence against persons that are seriously mentally ill. We just had Allison Miller Ferber, who is proposing legislation to change that. And Senator Brandes has gone ahead and filed, or is going to be filing, a proposed legislation so to prohibit the state from seeking death on persons that are seriously mentally ill. But I was astounded because I said, as a public defender, where the state attorney in the past, Bernie McCabe, sought death against his clients, did he find that to be a problem? Because me personally, and again, we want to hear from the public, call in 813-221-9700. You don't have to agree with me. It's my opinion. I find it problematic. If I was represented by an attorney and the state attorney is seeking to put me to death, and then later a House Speaker, because you know what? I didn't know Bernie McCabe intimately, but he could have had very great attributes. I'll give Chris Sprowls that. is it appropriate if an attorney's representing me against the state when they're seeking to put me to death, that defense attorney later to be on board with naming the courthouse after that prosecutor mash?
It's beyond that, right? So I'm a very proud former public defender. That was my first job out of law school, and when I became a public defender, they throw you into these divisions and they send you down to the jail, and you get into this intake division, and you're really thrown feet into the fire as a 25-year-old, punk kid who doesn't know nothing, and you go into it with the best intentions, and all of a sudden, when you get to the jail, ask any public defender. Defendant after defendant after defendant, you're sitting there, your heart is noble and you're working your tail off for these people. And these defendants, many of them will accuse you of, nah, I don't want a public defender. You guys both work for the state. You and the state, you're the same thing, man. I don't trust you guys. And I thought, at first I was offended. And then I realized, man, whether or not I'm offended is irrelevant. These people have this opinion. And in the abundance of caution, I want to avoid the appearance of impropriety, even though I'm not being improper. And the same thing happened with Bob Dillinger coming out for renaming this. There is one thing. Look, I was really good friends with my opposing counsel when I was a public defender, with my prosecutor friends. There is nothing wrong with that. Mr. Dillinger could have the utmost respect for the state attorney. May you rest in peace. I'm sure he was a good man. This is not us, all of us here opposing this has nothing to do with him personally. It is just avoiding the appearance of impropriety and upholding that idea of fairness. And the only explanation I can think of, I think Dan may have made this point on Facebook, was, look, your personal feelings and connections are one thing, but you can't let those, influence justice as a whole.
I agree. I was a public defender for almost 7 years. When I first started, I had, I was confronted with, you're a public pretender. Okay. As a private attorney, currently, sometimes that comes up. Oh, I don't want a public pretender. I don't want a public defender, in a very unfair, because you and I were public defenders, and they're not just public defenders, they're lawyers. And some of them are just as good as private attorneys, or better, right? Because they're in there all the time. And we have great attorneys, both in the private bar and in the public defender's office. So it's something that the public kind of, in their mind, I think generally looks at them as, I don't want a public defender. So Dan, do you agree? And yes, please go ahead. You had a powerful post via social media this week. So go ahead and please weigh in.
Well, I think, in my practice is estate planning, probate and stuff like that. So the only time I'm ever going to see the inside of a criminal courthouse is if I'm in trouble. So hopefully that's never going to happen. So, but, I think we have to be able to, and this is the part of attorneys, at times, like, we have to be able to put our into our client's shoes. And I just think to myself, like, if I'm a criminal defendant in this system and you're going into the state attorney's courthouse, like, how do you ever feel that you're going to get a fair shake? And the idea that we've obviously, over the summer, we had George Floyd, we've had all these protests, we've talked about social justice and criminal justice reform. And I can't imagine the first thing that we're going to do as far as criminal justice reform is name the courthouse after a state attorney. Like, that just does not seem like the direction that we should be going. Especially, I don't think it's appropriate anyway, as Maj said, for this, for one side or the other. I don't, as somebody pointed out, like, it didn't matter if it was, an angel or the devil. Like, I don't care. We don't want the thing named after the angel either. And so this is not about, whether Mr. McCabe was a great person or not, not the best or what. This is purely about whether it's appropriate to name a courthouse after one side or the other, at least, for me. So I don't even care about that other discussion about whether somebody is, honorable enough. Like, that's not even, I don't care. And so for me, it's just that. And I've spoken to public defenders, and they're not thrilled that this may be happening. the idea that they're going to have to defend their clients in the Bernie McCabe courthouse. That's not a very, not a great way to boost morale, within one of those offices in that courthouse.
I'm going to ask this next question to Getulio, but preface it in conjunction with what Maj said earlier. It's the truth. Me and Maj know that very well because we were former public defenders. But I'll tell you what, a lot of times people say the public defender and the state attorney's office are in cahoots. That's the mentality. They're in cahoots. So when, to me, it just strengthens that perception, whether it be false or not, when Bob Dillinger, the former public defender, is on board with agreeing to having the courthouse named after Bernie McCabe. Getulio, do you agree with that? What I just said? You have to unmute yourself. Yes. Maybe let me see if I can unmute you. Hold on. Okay, no, you do. Do you agree with that, Maj? Dan, either of you can go ahead while Getulio situates the mute button.
Welcome to 2021.
Yes, welcome to 2021.
Getulio, I can call my dad and he can kind of...
It's a little button.
Have you seen those Geico commercials or where, when you're getting old, when you turn into your parents?
I'll go a little further too. So just so people are aware, I'm a past president of the Clearwater Bar Association. So I have sat in on meetings with the chief judge, with Bob Dillinger, with the late Bernie McCabe, and I thought it was important to reach out to the past presidents of the Clearwater Bar. And so of about 20 past presidents that I reached out to, 10 of them did get back to me, and all 10 of them said that it was not appropriate. So I didn't have one, I'm sure there is a past president who may find this appropriate, but they did not reply back to me or call me or text me or anything and say that it was. So, and some of those people were prosecutors, some of those people were public defenders, and some of them have worked their entire career in the civil division. So.
Okay. So Maj, go.
Well, I was going to say, and I think it's, it's important to also note too, that, I don't think any of us here are trying to, really heavily criticize the people who want to do this either. I don't believe that they are going into this with some malevolent intent, but if we can avoid that appearance of impropriety, this is a no-brainer. I mean, this is like, I cannot believe we're even having this conversation, that it is so absurd. And I can't believe that we have to devote time to even, I mean, this is like entertaining, a lot of the people on the internet these days talking about conspiracy theories and whatnot. It's just like, what are we even talking about? We should not even have to have this discussion. I think it's really telling that there's nobody from the other side that's even willing to come on your show to talk about it live, because if they were subject to questioning, we would expose the absurdity of the whole thing.
Okay. This is one of you're right, Maj. The last time that I saw Bernie McCabe in the hallway, we had a pleasant exchange. But again, this is for purposes of there being no appearance of bias. I'm not going to dispute or doubt that many of the persons that are on board with the renaming, I had a pleasant conversation actually with one of the supporters, Sheriff Mulattieri, and he cited to some of the reasons that he was on board with the rename. Obviously, we're not agreeing on the issue, but there's some good things that Bernie had as a human, as a public servant. I'm not disputing that. What I am saying that it's not proper. It should be neutral. There is nothing wrong. What's the saying? You shouldn't fix something that's not broken. I don't think there's anything wrong with Pinellas County Justice Center.
The sign looks fine. It looks fine. It's great. It says what it does.
I don't see why you need the courthouse. To me, it's almost like a religious temple, a church. It's sacred to me. Now, do injustices occur there because juries get it wrong, prosecutors get it wrong? Yes, no side has the copyright on justice. It's adversarial. It's meant to be. The defense attorney, they're there, thank God, to not let just the government decide who's guilty or not, right? And in a jury system, thank God. But it shouldn't be leaning towards anyone. And so here's what I want to, if you all would just indulge me, I want, while Getulio still is figuring out on how to turn his mic, Dan, Maj, the floor will be yours. I think it would be time worthy for me to just read this, because I did a compromise. This is what I said to the Pinellas Commission, which, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and forward this broadcast after its publication to them. And I'm going to publish the names of the commissioners on the blog, Florida You Judge, to let the public know that the 7 commissioners that are going to, in the coming weeks, vote on whether to rename the courthouse or not. I want to read this. I wanted to do a compromise. I said, okay, if you are the hearts of everyone who are in power to make this happen, and those are the supporters and Sprowls who is suggesting this, could there be a fair compromise? If your heart's intent is to name it after McCabe, could you do like a dual name to represent both sides? And so I proposed, and I emailed Chief Rondolino, Chris Sprowls, Bruce Bartlett, the current acting the actual state attorney appointed by Ron DeSantis, Governor Ron DeSantis, and Ken Burke, the clerk. I also, like I said previously, emailed or sent a text to Bob Dillinger. I just want to read this and to see what your thoughts are, all 3 of you. Okay, so I said, would you have a problem with naming it Jagger / McCabe, McCabe / Jagger, whatever variation? Would you have a problem? I asked these gentlemen. And so here, Robert Jagger died last year during the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic, but right in the midst of it, some months, like in July, August, he passed away. McCabe / Jagger, whatever variation. Would you have a problem? Okay, somebody has is playing the broadcast, so I need you to turn that off because it's gonna backfeed into the broadcast here. Okay, so Robert Jagger, first Pinellas Pascal public defender, valued life and due process. Robert Jagger became public defender for Pinellas County in 1961, 2 years before a U.S. Supreme Court decision led to the creation of the job everywhere. Okay, he stayed for 35 years. This man was the first public defender in the country, I am told. This was published August of last year. And I'm going to just read it. I think it's worthy to read it. I'm going to try not to go too quick, but quick enough so that it's not incredibly time consuming. As a child, Ed Jagger, who's currently a judge here in Pinellas, his son, knew that his dad, Robert, mentored the young lawyers who constantly circulated in and out of their home. They even, at times, vacationed with the family. And he knew that many of his dad's best friends were the retired police officers who came to work as his investigators. But he didn't know how much about what his dad actually did, except this: every Christmas Day after the family opened presents, his dad would change into a suit and excuse himself for a few hours, saying, "I'm going off to work to get people out of jail." Later, after Ed Jagger became an attorney himself and eventually a Pinellas County judge, he realized what his dad was doing all those Christmases, volunteering to handle his clients' first appearances in court so his employees wouldn't have to. Okay. Robert Jagger, the Pinellas Pascal Circuit Court's first public defender died July 28th. He was 92. His son said the family did not know the specific cause of death, but that Mr. Jagger had experienced complications after cancer surgery earlier this year. Mr. Jagger had been a lawyer for just 3 years when in 1961 he was offered a newly created job, representing people who'd been accused of crimes in Pinellas County but couldn't afford to hire an attorney. He accepted, thinking he'd get good experience in 2 or 3 years and move on to something else, according to a 1995 St. Petersburg Times profile of him. He stayed for 35 years. By the time he left office in 1996, the National Legal Aid and Defenders Association said he was likely the longest serving public defender in the country of his era. 2 years after he started the Pinellas County job, a U.S. Supreme Court ruling led to the creation of public defenders across the country. Jagger's job expanded to cover both Pinellas and Pasco counties. It wasn't the kind of job that made him a household name, but over the next 3.5 decades, he left an indelible mark on the region's criminal justice system. The job was essentially a one-man show when Mr. Jagger began, his son recalled. By the end of his career, it expanded to dozens of assistant public defenders and hundreds of staffers spread across 4 offices. His case load grew from 470 cases in the first year to more than 35,000 in the mid-1990s. He loved his job, those close to him said, but he never let it encroach on time with his family. He was a staunch Republican who despised the death penalty. As he aged along with his job, he took great zeal in transitioning his offices from IBM Selectric typewriters to computers. And to those who worked for and around him, his greatest legacy was one of opportunity and mentorship. In the 1960s at Stetson University College of Law, he helped establish the first law school clinic in Florida, which allowed volunteer students to argue cases before a judge. Such programs are now widespread. Young attorneys who worked for him as assistant public defenders went on to become well-known trial lawyers, and in the case of current public defender Bob Dillinger, his successor. Many of the young attorneys Mr. Jagger hired lacked eye-catching resumes. Ed Jagger recalled. That didn't matter to his father, who looked for one particular skill. Could the job candidate communicate well, whether arguing a case before a judge or sitting down with a jailed client? When my dad interviews, he never looks at the resume beyond the person's name, Ed Jagger said. He said he was just looking for someone he could sit down with and talk to like a next-door neighbor. Pinellas Pasco Chief Judge Anthony Rondolino began his legal career in Mr. Jagger's office in 1974. He stayed 15 years, including about 10 as a chief assistant public defender. As a young lawyer, he was particularly impressed by the work-life balance Mr. Jagger embodied. He said, the increasing demands of the job didn't stop him from coaching his son's little league teams. So I'm not going to continue on. It's a very good article. I would invite the public to go ahead and read it. But here's the thing. So I offered a compromise. I said, let's go ahead. In order for the appearance of bias to be removed, let's have a dual name. I emailed Bruce Bartlett, the current state attorney. He didn't respond to that. I said, would you have an objection to that? No response. I sent that to Chris Sprowls, the first mover, proponent, spearhead of the request that it be renamed. No response. The current House Speaker, who's asking Pinellas County Commission to rename the House, I asked him if he'd be on board with a compromise to perhaps take the bias appearance away and duly name it after Bernie McCabe, his mentor, and the former first public defender in the country, Robert Jagger, who, as we just read a Tampa Bay Times article, it sounds like he is worthy for the same honor. And so no response from him. I asked Bob Dillinger, who worked for Robert Jagger, no response. And Ken Burke, the clerk, no response either. As to MASH, does that, when I'm offering a compromise and there's no response, does that give an appearance of bias?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like no one wants to offend their boss, even though he wasn't the boss of any of those people, other than Bruce Bartlett, who you mentioned. But it sounds like all those people, just don't want to offend the memory of their boss and friend, which, I don't think is very noble of them to do. I mean, they're well entitled to have their own opinions, but this is just like such a backwards moving thing, right? And I know we didn't really want to get into this, into like the meat and potatoes of some of the problematic things that Bernie McCabe also did. I really want to try to stay away from some of that stuff, but some of the things that he did and more importantly refused to do, just coming along with the times and so forth, were all, I think, we're all intended to stack the deck, so to speak, against criminal defendants. And I just don't think that should be the case. I mean, you look at the differences in, some of the reasons that we name buildings after people, and longevity shouldn't be one of them, right? Like him having the job for a long time shouldn't just be a reason in and of itself to name the building after him. Him putting bad guys in jail, a lot of bad guys in jail, also shouldn't be a reason. I mean, that's what everybody does. We can't give, credit to him for just doing the baseline thing that he is supposed to do as part of his constitutional obligation to perform that job. So, it's highly problematic. And the fact that all these ostensibly neutral people are not on board with any sort of compromise or anything else. Here's a compromise: make a standalone state attorney's office building, like a literal office building. Take it out of the Justice Center and build it, and rename that, name that the Bernie McCabe State Attorney Building. I don't see anything wrong with that. You don't have to name the actual courthouse.
I don't either. I don't see a problem with that. Dan? Getulio, you haven't? Did you? Okay, great. Getulio, let's hear from you.
All right. Clearly, this is implicitly and blatantly biased. It's a symbolic attack, and I'm coming from the place of an activist and an advocate from the community. So we generally don't trust the law. Whether that, and it's nice that you brought up that whether you're on the public defender side or you're a prosecutor, generally speaking, people just from this world, they don't trust the law because they feel like they're marginalized and criminalized for certain actions. I don't agree with it necessarily. I think that through the justice system is how we change things, and engaging with the justice system is how we change things. But it is what it is. Now, yeah, this is implicitly biased. If we look at state legislature and the makeup of that, you can clearly tell they're trying to send a message, especially after the protests last year, and naming a building after a prosecutor is trying to say we very much here in the state of Florida stand for law and order. And and I believe it's to counter things like the Black Lives Matter movement winning a Nobel Peace or being nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. That's how I view it anyway. And as far as how I feel about the thing in general is, though idiom, I don't have to bring it up, but justice is blind, right? So it shouldn't be one way or another. And I very much agree with Maj and what he said. If you're going to name a building after a state attorney, just take the building, take the state attorney office out of the building and name it after Bernie McCabe. In the story, no bias, right? But the entire courthouse, no. So there's an implicit bias, and I feel like the justice system here in Florida is trying to send a message. We very much control this. We're on this side of the law. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Oh, Haiti, you're on mute.
Thank you, my little technological or techie support person. Thank you, Maj. Listen, what you just said, Getulio, I just read, and which supports what you're saying. we just went through a very hard last year pandemic, compounded with civil unrest after George Floyd, and the issues that still remain. We're not done. I want to point two things out based on what you just said. One, that supports your view as to the public's perceptions, some within the public, with racial issues, disparities, injustices. This is what, a couple of days ago, we all read, or if you read the paper, you certainly would have come across this Tampa Bay Times article published January 28th. A white man pulled a gun at a Florida protest. Black men took the blame. So the Tampa Bay Times says there's footage that it appears it's the white guy that pointed a gun at black protesters after they were taunted by the counter protesters to Black Lives Matter. And so this state attorney, the current state attorney, they're not going to face any criminal, but Davis is the white guy that pulled the gun, will face no criminal charges for his actions that night. Instead, police relied on blurry images to blame Cloud. That Cloud is one of the black protesters, and another black protester for provoking Davis. Prosecutors agreed Davis acted in self-defense. So this state attorney, Bruce Bartlett, who had served a long time under Bernie as his chief, that the office has decided not to prosecute the white guy who pulled a gun at black protesters, Black Lives Matter protesters. For those of you who are interested, the title is "A White Man Pulled a Gun at a Florida Protest. Black Men Took the Blame." Here's one more thing. Here's one more thing that I do want to share, and I want commentary from all three of you. Again, this is not a broadcast to impugn in any way or disrespect the memory of Bernie McCabe. But listen, when you go into public office, I think that's another. Private citizens, they decide, you know what, I'm not going to serve. I don't want to be under scrutiny. I don't want to be. But once you're in public office, and now Chris Sprowls has opened the door to this discussion because, as you said, Maj, whatever the criteria is, which there is a criteria. I was emailed by the Pinellas County Commission with the criteria that they need to look at before they vote and decide whether the criteria is met. And this is the last that I'm going to say of it, and the rest of it you all can discuss. I appeared at a juvenile justice forum in 2018. Michelle Rayner, who's the House Rep now for District 70, was there, as was Ashley Green, who's a very active activist in St. Pete here. Michelle Williams was there. There was a lot of activists present. Sadie and D'Angelo, they were there from Restorative Justice Coalition. They were present. I was there. I had a front row seat. I was able to squeeze in and get one seat. Bernie McCabe was there. He was a panelist. Sheriff Gualtieri was there. Renee Flowers, who was a school board member, was sitting there also, addressing implicit bias and testing. Judith Scully, who's a professor at Stetson, was the moderator, and I recall that there were staggering numbers as to the disparity between black boys and white boys, followed with a request that Bernie McCabe consider taking an implicit bias test. He said, no, there's no need for that in my office. That the reaction from the crowd was a huge chuckle because they'd just been presented with numbers that appeared that there might be an issue with disparity. Okay, now and so I like to be accurate. If I'm saying anything that's inaccurate, please contact me. I'll do a follow-up. I'll fall on the sword and say my bad and correct the record. But I went ahead and asked for numbers, and so I'm going to share those now. And here we go. This is from the Florida Department Juvenile Justice, Our Children, Our Future, Delinquency Profile 2020. I wanted to see the comparison of white to black, intake, arrest, race, ethnicity split on all offenses. Here we're going to see the years starting in the fiscal year of 2015 to 2016. Okay, wait a minute. I have to do this again for the Sixth Circuit. Okay. Is this all arrests? Okay, could either of you, any of you, please pick up so that while I get these numbers?
Yeah. Hey, I'd love to jump in here.
Go ahead, please.
Those numbers that you're alluding to and that you're about to display there, really, and there was some statistics that came out before, not just with juvenile filings, but with just sending people to prison. Some statistics that came out with scoring people out to prison and giving them prison sentences, where the Sixth Judicial Circuit was far and away ahead of everyone else in the other districts. So those numbers basically just are empirical evidence to back up what all of us who practice criminal defense and civil rights in Pinellas County already knew. If you ask any criminal defense attorney who ever took cases in Pinellas Pasco County, they didn't have email addresses until 20 years after other people. And you know, there's no good reason for that to occur. What you want to do from an ethical standpoint is you want to have an open line of communication between both attorneys, whether that's a civil case or criminal case. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to communicate. And some of the quote unquote safeguards that were put in place by Bernie McCabe's office were deliberately designed to slow down that communication, right? And so I think it's one thing to, you know, give someone credit for being a trailblazer. You know, I'm not saying maybe there exists some possibility where there is some trailblazing future state attorney who really upends the justice system and does a lot of like really proactive, progressive things that check off a bunch of boxes to help the community. But you know, Mr. McCabe, again, may he rest in peace, didn't reinvent the wheel. I mean, he didn't invent anything. He had a very closed-minded approach to prosecuting. He didn't help anything with regards to diversity in the community. He didn't help. He didn't have, you know, that many people of color who were prosecutors in his office. I mean, he didn't do anything groundbreaking. So again, what are the parameters we're looking at that we've decided to now name this courthouse after him, other than just, hey man, he was my friend. He ran this county for the past 30 years. Let's just name the building after him. Again, it's outrageous.
Let's look at the numbers now. Delinquency profile for intake, arrest, race, ethnicity split. So we have fiscal year 2015, 2016. This 41%, that represents white youth, that color. And then black is the bluish aqua. I don't know what description to put to that color, but so we have in 2015 to 2016 fiscal year, we have 41% it's white youth versus 49 black youth. The next year, 2016 2017, 39% white youth, 52% black youth. 2017 to 2018, 40% white, 51% black youth. 2018 to 2019, that's the year that the forum I attended, he was there, the late Bernie McCabe. White youth, 40%, black youth, 51%. And then 2019 to 2020, 38 white, 52 black. So again, I'm not showing this to impugn anyone, especially after they are no longer with us. May he rest in peace. But Chris Sprowls, the House Representative Speaker, for Florida who worked under Bernie, who considered Bernie a close friend and a mentor. He has initiated this effort, and so this has to be discussed publicly. We want to hear from you, public. If you have any questions, comments, we've received a couple of comments. Kimberly DeFalco, what an incredible man. Rest peacefully, Mr. Jagger. Yes. So I'm at a loss to understand how I respond to Chris Sprowls' request with a compromise saying, let's give an appearance of equality, justice for all. That's what our Constitution is about. Justice for all. Justice for all. He's worthy too. Chris Sprowls hasn't responded. Like I said, I'm not going to reiterate, but you all heard what I said. How many people, Reagan Calloway Miller, how many people who worked for Bernie McCabe in the state attorney's office saw him as a mentor? I don't know the answer to that. And if any of you do,
probably a lot. Probably a lot.
Well, I also know some that worked for his office for 4 years and never spoke to him. So, I mean, obviously he had his favorites in the office, as probably most offices would. But there's also people who worked for 4 years and never had a conversation with him. So,
okay, so all of you,
I'd like
with
to jump
those
in.
stats that we just saw, I was there in person. Renee Flowers, who just got elected to the Pinellas County Commission, she was on the panel. She talked about the importance of implicit bias, especially now in the time that we're living with the criminal justice reform and the racial issues that are existing in our country. They presented him, Judith Scully. She's a professor for Stetson. If I'm wrong, she can reach out and say no, that she was a moderator. She presented staggering numbers about the comparison between white boys and black boys, or black youth in general, that may have included young girls. That's a problem to me. It's a problem. And because a perception is not only that, and I'm going to let you guys comment on this, but here's the other email that I sent to Mr. Bernie McCabe before his passing. Good morning, Mr. McCabe. This was this past year in October. Please see attached, and please advise if you'd like to comment on this year's rankings on prison admissions by circuit in Florida. The Sixth Circuit has the distinction of leading in our state. Pinellas Pascal ranked number 1. Who should the award be sent to? I will be so. We, under McCabe's administration, for that fiscal year last year, I asked him and the public defender, because I'm asking, wait, what's going on in the Sixth Circuit that we lead in the state, sending people off to prison? Okay, now you all can talk. I'm going to shut up.
well, I'll chime in. And so, I mean, I think we can look at the group of people who are leading this effort to a certain extent, the people who've approved it. But let's face it, like, they're all part of this older white male club. And as Maj has mentioned, you know, the reality also is Bernie, to a large extent, has run the criminal justice system in Pinellas County. For better or for worse, I don't think the state attorney should be running any criminal justice system. You know, I'll say I believe probably our chief judge, the state attorney, public defender, and sheriff clerk probably doesn't play as big a role, but they're all too close. I mean, I think we all had, during the pandemic and some of the protests, the chief judge met with the sheriff, you know, behind closed doors, and we discussed that. You know, the reality is these were very good friends. And there's nothing wrong with them being friends, but their opinions on this subject are incredibly biased, and you know, this, and I think in the others will get to this too, but there's a lack of understanding of bias and getting to the fact that they're all these white men. You know, they're also a part of the same political party that doesn't believe in institutional racism, and they're not going to believe that there's a problem. So there was no reason to take a test, and so I think that's part of this belief here, is that they believe there is no problem to even look at, and he's just part of that. I mean, he's just part of that system that was perpetuating that. So
yeah, Dan makes an excellent point, which is these people are so biased themselves, and the implicit bias within them is so strong that they didn't even stop to think to realize how improper and how ridiculous of an assertion, an idea that this was. Like, you walk into that Justice Center and you really feel like again, rest in peace. But for the last however long 13 years I've been practicing law, every time you walk into that justice center, from the clerk to the sheriffs the guy in charge is Bernie McCabe. He runs the whole thing, right? And they all answer to him. They all have this idea where it's like they've forgotten the ones who were supposed to be impartial, or the ones, they have forgotten what their role in the whole system is. They became advocates rather than being neutral, and naming the courthouse, even suggesting naming the courthouse after Mr. McCabe, is on its face incredible. It's almost hard to believe. We went through the past couple of years of removing Confederate monuments outside of the courthouse, and now this is the equivalent to essentially not putting up a Confederate monument, but putting up a monument to someone who has his thumb on the scale, right, of justice. And it shouldn't even remotely be like that.
Shelly Close Mills, thanks for commenting. Absolutely agreed. Agreed again, Mr. Parri. Thanks, Shelly, for commenting. And we have a caller. We have community activist Michelle Williams on the line. And go ahead, Michelle.
Hey, Haiti. I want to say first thank you to yourself and to your panel guests for having this discussion, because it's of the utmost importance, not only to me as a Black mother and a Black grandmother, but also a Black activist and Black voice, not just for the Black race, but for humanity, period. The most disturbing thing that I witnessed when you and I attended that conference in 2018, and I made the comment there, is that the deputy that was there to be the security guard for Bernie McCabe, anyone, whether you were Black, white, or indifferent, if you challenged him, this man came over next to you in a manner. Not only was he in a very, very intimidating manner, but as if like he said, if you say one more thing, I'm going to arrest you. So he came and stood next to me. Like I remember it like it was yesterday. So I looked him square in his eye, because one thing that my great grandfather always told me, when you are challenging a man, you look him square in his eye. And so I looked this gentleman in his eye and told him, I ain't going nowhere and you don't intimidate me. So I'm against this. I'm loving the fact that people are actually waking up, that the powers that the people, the citizens that have the rightful power to say something and do something to stop the hypocrisy of institutionalized racism, the biases that's inside of the courtroom. I'm loving it. Let me tell you something. Bernie McCabe came from the lineage of the hate that hate produced. So I'm not going to rest in peace, Bernie McCabe. Good riddance. You're just one ugly soul that had to leave this earth so the real work of the people can be done.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your call.
All right, Haiti. Now I'm not having technical difficulties. I have a lot to say about this.
Great. Cool. And we have 6 more minutes, so have at it. Again, we want to hear from the public. 813-221-9700. Please call if you'd like to weigh in. We want to hear from you. 813-221-9700. Getulio.
I'm glad that you put on those statistics, but the truth is, like, I grew up here, and those statistics were my real life, right? Florida in general has a problem with over-policing, has a problem with an overzealous criminal justice system. I believe that Florida refers students, right? Since you were talking about the juvenile system, refers students to law enforcement 30% higher than the national average. That's ridiculous. They treat, and you saw the demographic makeup of those students who end up in the criminal justice system. It's they treat Black and Latinx males like men. They don't treat them like children. That's the first issue, right? And I know this from firsthand experience, because I almost ended up in the school to prison pipeline. I'm a high school dropout, right? And eventually I got myself back into college and whatnot. But That's the issue with Florida itself. And now going back to what I believe it was Miss Williams was saying, she's saying that, oh, now things are changing as far as institutional racism. Are they really? Because if we look at what's happening in the state legislature in House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 484, they're even limiting our ability to protest peacefully, right? With this quote unquote anti-riot bill. So there's an implicit bias throughout this whole state when it comes to criminal justice and law and order. It's not an equitable system, the way that I look at it. And I do know several of the protesters and activists who were there at that Pinellas County protest who had the guns drawn on them. That's another example of a double standard that we have in our criminal justice system here in Florida. It could go on and on and on, and I'm sure you can pull up several articles, Haiti. But this is my reality. This is the reality that I grew up in. The friends that I grew up around, we saw it every day. You know, and sadly, that's why I'm an activist and an advocate today. People need to push against it. You know, so that's what I have to say as far as that.
Okay, we have another caller, and caller, thank you for calling in. And what's your comment, question?
Hi, this is Shelley Mills. I've been commenting all along. First of all, I'm going to agree that the courthouse is meant for justice, not only for indictments and prosecutions. And he was a prosecutor, and he was a tough prosecutor. And it sends the wrong message to represent only one table in the room. And secondly, where is the money coming from for this? I mean, do we have a firm estimate of the scope of work and how much it'll cost? And are the funds for making the changes coming from the private sector or from taxpayers? I assume that it's the latter, since it always seems to land on us. And, when you look at not only the signs, on the road, but we also have to memorialize his name on the buildings, and stationery changes and cards and updating the website and the database. There's got to be money involved in that. And, perhaps there's allocated funds in the budget for it, but there shouldn't be. I see at least 24 homeless people every time I drive through Central Largo, around East Bay, Starkey, Elmerton, Seminole Boulevards, and it's not hard to find them. So we're going to spend money to honor someone who's passed on and won't know about it, or to massage someone's ego for having thought of it. And my gut tells me that if we're trying to be representative of the needs of Pinellas County citizens, we should be focusing on those who can be saved by investing in those citizens. That versus honoring someone who's dead. He's past saving. And when public coffers are stuffed and overflowing, then frivolous actions like this could be revisited, although it shouldn't be. The complex is named Pinellas County Justice Center for a reason. The name is representative of who we are as Pinellas County citizens. It's our place to seek justice. What is wrong with leaving the name as it is? It doesn't sound like this guy was a very nice guy. I'm sure he was good at his job, but he sounds like a bully. And we shouldn't have to pay for this kind of vanity, especially since he served to convict, not defend. I don't want to go at this from a party's perspective, but I noticed that Representative Sprowls and his supporters that were listed in the January 21st Tampa Bay Times are Republicans. I was friends in high school with one of them, County Clerk Ken Burke, and I always felt like he was very fiscally responsible, yet he signed off on supporting this. Democrats are referred to as a tax and spend party, but how is this any different? We're throwing money at this, and we're the taxpayers. We're the boss of every elected official. They serve at the pleasure of their employers, which are us. And it's time that they remember it and spend our money wisely instead of tossing it away at what I believe is foolishness. And since the pandemic, most of us are not flush with replacement tax monies. So that's my opinion.
Thank you for calling. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we have a comment from Chris Parker, worked there 3 years and never met him. I wasn't in the circle. Okay, he's currently a criminal defense attorney. We had an hour-long discussion. Wow, I expected it to be 30 minutes, but it went on for an hour. So for those of you who tuned in and viewed, thank you so much for tuning in. I want to thank Maj Vasigh, and I see that there's body language indicating that you want to say something, and I'm going to give you that opportunity. But before you do, I'm going to thank the viewers. Please share. This is an important thing. We need to keep the courthouse neutral. If there's discussion or consideration for a compromise, I'm open to that, because this isn't something that's against Bernie. It's just, it's in favor of no appearance of bias, and so that the public can confidently walk in there. Remember, everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty by the state attorney's office. You're presumed innocent, and some persons that are accused, they are innocent. Some are innocent. You shouldn't have to walk into a courthouse and feel like, is this one-sided? Am I going to get a fair trial? We want to support confidence by the public, from the public, for our system. We can't undermine, we can't allow the public to think, is this fair? And not have confidence in our system. So, Maj.
One day someone's going to run against Bruce Bartlett or whoever the chosen successor is, and there's going to be a progressive new state attorney with a new agenda that comes into that office, and they're going to change so many things that if today we rename this building the Bernie McCabe Justice Center, 10 or 15 years from now, with the benefit of hindsight, we're going to take that name back off.
I agree. Dan, do you have any last words before we bid everyone good night?
Well, I would just agree, and I really would thank Shelley for that phone call. I think it was very thoughtful, especially when we start to look at the cost. And I've even heard rumblings that there's been talk of furloughs and different things. I know the clerk's office has had budgetary issues, and so our court system is nowhere near flush with cash. And I think there's much better things, even if this was appropriate, which it's not. Spending money on something like this at this time is even more absurd than the idea of doing it in the first place. So that's it.
Oh, I think, Haiti, you're back on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to bring you on to just keep me in check. Shelley.
I think we're ending here. We're done.
Great Maj from Shelley Close, and Kimberly DeFalco is awesome photojournalist. She's amazing. Check her out on her Kim DeFalco on social media. She's an awesome photographer. Great show, Haiti, Dan, Maj, and Getulio. And Getulio, I'm gonna let you have the last word before we say goodnight to everyone. You have anything that you'd like to say before we wrap up and say goodnight?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that Steakhouse, it's going to be futile naming it after Bernie McCabe. It's just a matter of time before the up and coming generation take the reins. And that's not going to stand, because it's just so blatantly biased that there's no justice there. That's pretty much where I stand on the issues. Thank you for the opportunity, Ada.
Of course, always, Getulio. Thank you for joining me. Maj, thank you for joining me. And Dan, thank you also. Thanks to those who have tuned in. Haiti Oropesa with Florida You Judge. Till next time.